To download more lectures, learn more about our project, and to help support it, visit www.bayyinah.com/dream. That's BAYYINAH/dream. You are free to share these recordings with family and friends. Thank you and Jazakumullah khairan for helping us make our dream a reality.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر اللهم اجعلنا من الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اجعلنا منهم ومن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. آمين يا رب العالمين. ثم أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, we've reached the study of the 103rd surah, Surah al-Asr. And I want to begin by saying that even though this is the shortest surah up till now that we're studying, and the shorter one is coming later on, Surah Al-Kawthar, I find giving dars on this surah the most difficult. And it's probably the case that it will take me more than one session to at least cover with you the notes that I've taken and the things that I want to share with you. And I pray that Allah Azza wa Jal gives me clarity of speech, that I may be able to communicate its lessons to you بإذن الله ta'ala with some degree of clarity and without avoiding too much confusion. The first thing I want to share with you about this surah is that in today's session, probably and most likely we're going to talk about an overview and kind of look at the surah as a whole instead of going into word by word analysis. Perhaps that will be our next session, inshallah ta'ala. But first and foremost, a bit about the coherence and the placement of this surah in the Quran. This is the 103rd surah, so the surah before it that we studied last week, Surah Al-Takathur, it comes right after it, and there are lots of parallels. For example, Shaykh Fadl Salih Hassan al-Ra'i, he says, هذه السورة وقعت بين خسرين. This surah is situated between two great losses. The previous surah said, ألهاكم التكاثر حتى زرتم المقابر. You were deluded by your want of having more and more and more, which was a loss. And the next surah is going to be وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ. And there you find كَلَّا لَيُنْبَذَنَّ فِي الْحُطَمَةِ. The person is being thrown into the hellfire. نَارُ اللَّهِ الْمُوقَدَةِ. So there's loss before and there's loss after, and then in the middle is the surah that says إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. This is the surah of loss. It's situated between those two. The other thing to note about this surah is that in the last surah we found that Allah Azza wa Jal, the last thing He told us was ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. On that day you are certainly going to be asked in regards to the favor and the blessings that you enjoyed. And this surah begins with the greatest blessing that we enjoy. So Allah says you'll be asked about all the blessings, but what's the biggest blessing? It's time itself. The fact that we have time, everyone has time. The rich person, the poor person, the healthy, the sick, the old, the young, everyone has time. So, and this is the number one thing we'll be asked about, how we spent our time. SubhanAllah. So Allah says you'll be interrogated about the great blessings, and the very next surah begins with the blessing that we appreciate the least, which is al-Asr itself, its time. Then the previous surah talked about the great distraction, at-takathur. We talked about takathur being something that alhaakum at-takathur, it distracted you. We're too busy wanting more, competing and getting more, showing off what we have to others. This is what we're busy with. But the previous surah didn't tell us, what are you distracted from? It's one thing to be distracted, then you have to say, what are you distracted from? For example, you could say, video games are distracting you from studying for the exam. So yes, the video games are the distraction, but what are they distracting you from? From the exam, from studying, right? But the previous surah didn't mention an. And we talked about this last week. Usually Allah says, لا تلهكم أموالكم ولا أولادكم عن ذكر الله. Don't let your money and kids distract you. But He doesn't stop there. He says, distract you from the remembrance of Allah. There's a from. But there was no from in the previous surah. What are we being distracted from? That's the question that's left open. And in this surah we find, what is it that most human beings are distracted from and they don't do? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. When we go into the detail and these lessons of this last ayah of Surah al-Asr, we'll find this is what most human beings are not concerned with. We're preoccupied with other things. They're distracted from this task. And this is the only task that can save them from loss. SubhanAllah. Then, in an interesting contrast, and this is part of the style of the Qur'an. The Qur'an, a lot of times, it presents ideas contrasting terms with each other. The central term in the previous surah, the central term, was takathur. And the central term of this surah is actually khusr, loss. I'm roughly translating khusr as loss. While takathur means to get more and more and more. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. At-takathur means to gain and want more and more and more. Khusr literally means to lose your most essential assets. You know, it's one thing you invest your money in a business and you were hoping to make 20%, but you only made 10%. That's a loss, but you still made something. You didn't lose your initial investment. But when you put money in a business and you lose the money you put in and don't make anything on top of that either, you lose your capital investment basically. Ra'sul mal, what's called in Arabic. Ra'sul mal. You lose that too. Then that is called khusr. In other words, the previous surah was talking about people trying to get more and more and more. And then Allah says, no, the reality is you are in loss. No matter how much you think you've gained, the reality is that you are situated in a position of loss. SubhanAllah. We find that this surah is a concluding address of the previous 4 surahs. This began in Surah Al-Zilzal. إِذَا زُلْزِلَتِ الْأَرْضُ زِلْزَالَهَا. Then we studied the surah after that, وَالْعَادِيَاتِ ضَبْحًا. Then we went after that, and Al-Qari'ah. Then again after that, At-Takathur. And in all of them, there was the plight of the human being. Here's the reality of the last day, which was in Surah Al-Zilzal and Surah Al-Qari'ah. That's the reality of the last day. And here you are, who's not concerned at all. And that lack of concern was Surah Al-Adiyat and again Surah Al-Takathur. The final conclusion of all of that is the human being, in the end, because he's distracted, what's the state of affairs? He is in loss. He is immersed in a state of loss. So it's almost a conclusion to that entire discussion that's being presented in this surah. We find this surah is also very similar in many respects actually to Surah Al-Tin. Surah Al-Tin we covered a few sessions ago. And in that surah Allah Azza wa Jal says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ. Famous surah, right? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Here what does he say? Something similar. He says إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, but says it a little differently. This time he says وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. It's a little bit different. Here also there is mention of the human being. Al-insan. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. In that surah Allah also mentioned the human being. He said لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. So there's mention of human beings in both. There's a mention of those who believed and did righteous deeds in both of them. But there, you could compare them together as far as their theme and their structure. As far as negative, you could look at it overview as negative reinforcement compared to positive reinforcement. In other words, Surah Al-Asr is very, it's the overwhelming theme of it is warning. Okay, it's negative reinforcement. But Surah Al-Tin, Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned it ended it even in a positive note. There's no mention of loss, rather, فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ فَمَا يُكَذِّبُكَ بَعْدُ بِالدِّينِ أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمِ الْحَاكِمِينَ. It's actually positive, and even in the beginning, the human beings created in the best possible form. So there's a lot of positive lessons in Surah Al-Tin, but there's a lot of warning in Surah Al-Asr. But when you combine the two lessons together, you learn some very remarkable things. There, Allah said the human being is created in the best possible form. Here he said, roughly translated, every human being is in a state of loss. If he's created in the best possible form, then why would he be in a state of loss, right? You know, if you're created to meet success, then it's a tragedy that you're even qualified to be successful, and yet still you ended up being a loser. You still ended up losing. So Allah Azza wa Jal did not tell us that the human being is in loss first. He told us the human being is qualified to be successful first. And it's his own failure that leads him to become of those who have lost. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. This comes later on, but that declaration is earlier. I want to share with you in regards to this surah the very, very profound, very beautiful things that get overlooked. In this surah, Allah Azza wa Jal mentions 4 things at the end. You all know this. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. 4 things. But 3 of those, or 2, the last 2 things that are tawasi over and over, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, they're both actions. Roughly translated, they are communicated as enjoying the truth, to enjoying perseverance. That's how an average translation addresses the subject matter of وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. But their actions. What's the ayah? What's the part of the ayah before that? وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. They do good things. They act right. They act out righteous deeds. Isn't that also actions? So Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions iman, which is a thing inside of you. It's not outside, it's on the inside. Then He mentions amal, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. But He usually only says those two things. He doesn't go further. But here what does He say? وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. And then adds two specific kinds of actions. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. It could have been وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. It could have been any other action too. But He highlighted two actions. The lesson from that is, these are the actions that people will overlook. And as we continue our study of the surah, we will find, why is it critical to mention these actions? Other actions you will understand. وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, by the way, when you tell someone he does good things. He's a good Muslim, he does good things. What things come to your mind? He prays, he goes to Hajj, he fasts in Ramadan, he stays away from haram things. This is what comes to your mind. These are the first things that pop in the mind. This is a good person, he does good things. What things don't come to your mind? Tawasi bil haqq and Tawasi bil sabr. It's critical that these things be mentioned because they cannot be overlooked. And why can't they be overlooked? The necessity of not overlooking them, especially in this surah. Inshallah ta'ala, when the time comes, we'll discuss it in more detail. Then there's the issue of just the word wa between all of the conditions that Allah put. Human beings are in loss. We're glazing the translation right now. And the next session, inshallah, word by word analysis. But in this last exception, human beings are in loss except who? And I'm again roughly translating: those who believed, acted righteously, or did good righteous works, and then enjoined each other to truth and enjoined each other to perseverance. But in between those four things, there's an and. Except those who did this, and they did this, and they did this, and they did this. You know what wa does as opposed to aw? Right? What it is it's something you have to meet. If the exception is, the only exception to these people are people who do A and B and C and D, which means how many of those things do they have to do? All of them. If you put an or in between them, what happens? You could do some others, right? But if you put and in between them, then the only people who will meet the exception are people who fulfill all the conditions, not some of them. They can't afford to only have some of the conditions met. They need all those conditions. So this declaration in this surah is very powerful, and the exception is only one exception, but anyone who wants to be the exception will have to meet four conditions. Usually in the Quran, Allah mentions two conditions. Which two conditions? الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Those He mentions two conditions. But in this surah, He mentions how many? He mentions four conditions. This is the most comprehensive place, most elaborate place, talking about the exception to those who are in a state of loss. And we'll see, inshallah ta'ala, as we proceed, why that is. I want to share with you a famous quote in regards to this surah. I think it sums up what I'm trying to communicate. This is by Fakhruddin al-Razi. He said things in his tafseer that sometimes are considered controversial, rahimahullah, but we still don't take away from the fact that he's one of the greatest grammarians we ever had in our history, and one of the greatest mufassirun in our history. Some of his commentary has solved many, many problems. So we leave the bad and we take the good. If there's something that's controversial and it's not acceptable, or it's, even if you want to go as far as calling it a mistake, the issue is, who are we to judge a person based on their mistakes? All of us are full of mistakes. Anybody after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is open to criticism. So there's never going to be such a thing as a perfect scholar or a scholar that's not going to be questioned. There's not a single scholar in Islamic history that's not subject to criticism. Right? So it's no shock that somebody comes up and criticizes a scholar and says, why do you read his work? He said this, this, and this. Yes, he did say this, this, and this, and I have the right to disagree, but he said a lot of good things too. And it's, in the end, the criterion of good and bad is the truth, is the evidence. When somebody says things based on evidence, we take it. When somebody says things that are not based on evidence, we don't take it. The bottom line isn't the person, it's the truth itself. So we don't reject people based on a mistake that they make. I mean, think about that. Have you said something wrong before in your life? And somebody says, don't listen to that guy. That one time he said something that I didn't like, or that was wrong. I said it was wrong, but that doesn't discredit the person's work. A good example of that, even though I'm not a fan of translations, is the Yusuf Ali translation. Yusuf Ali rahimahullah was one of the first translators of the Quran in English. Impeccable English translation. He had a very unique take on riba. He didn't think that interest as it is today is riba, as described in the Quran and Sunnah. He had a weird take on it or whatever. Most scholars didn't accept his take. That doesn't take away from the fact that the guy spent 20 years traveling the ummah, looking at historical sites and writing an extensive translation. May Allah reward him for it. He made a mistake. You call it a mistake, but you don't pass judgment on the person. Anyhow, the beautiful quote from Fakhruddin al-Razi in his Tafseer Kabir, this is what I wanted to share with you. هَذِهِ الْآيَةِ فِيهَا وَعِيدٌ شَدِيدٌ. The first thing. In this ayah there is an intense, a severe warning, a threat, and a warning that's filled with a promise. لِأَنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى حَكَمَ بِالْخَسَارَةِ. Because in this ayah Allah Azza wa Jal declared loss, utter loss, عَلَى جَمِيعِ النَّاسِ, against all humanity. Allah has mandated loss for all humanity altogether. جَمِيعِ النَّاسِ إِلَّا مَنْ كَانَ آتِيًا بِهَذِهِ الْأُمُورِ الْأَرْبَعَةِ. Except for the one who comes to Allah, who approaches with these 4 exceptions. That's what he's saying. But then he goes further and he says, وَدَلَّ ذَلِكَ أَنَّ النَّجَاةَ مُعَلَّقَةٌ بِمَجْمُوعَةِ هَذِهِ الْأُمُورِ. And the language illustrates that salvation, being saved on the Day of Judgment, hangs in the balance of these 4 things. You meet these 4 conditions and you're saved, and you don't, you're in trouble. And because of the language, it's illustrated that it's illustrated that, subhanAllah. And this is why I felt it urgent to even make the announcement after Jum'ah to invite as many of you as possible to come and listen to the message of this surah, because in many ways this is the summary of the entire Quran, and in many ways this surah is a summary of all of the deen. It's a summary of the entire message of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is why ulama give this surah a lot of importance. It's 3 ayat. It's very short. Every kid memorizes it because it's easy. It's very easy. But the amount of scholarship that has been done on it is daunting. It is absolutely daunting how much work has been done on it. Now, in this series of discourse, what I want to share with you is in the previous surahs, Allah has made comments about the human being. For example, He said a few sessions ago, we studied, يَا أَيُّهَا الْإِنسَانِ مَا غَرَّكَ بِرَبِّكَ الْكَرِيمِ. Human being, what deluded you? What kept you away from your gracious master? What was such a big distraction that deceived you? In other words, that you remember al-Hakum al-Takathur? Allah is actually directly complaining to the human being in that surah, saying, what deluded you? What was it that took you away from your gracious master? Then Allah said, يَا أَيُّهَا الْإِنسَانِ إِنَّكَ كَادِحٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ كَدْحًا فَمُلَاقِيهِ. You forgetful human being, you are chugging away towards your Lord. Like it or not, you are headed towards your Lord, effort after effort after effort, and you're eventually going to meet Him. There's no avoiding it. You could be distracted all you want, you're still headed in that direction. Then He told the human being, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. We created the human being in enormous toil, meaning the life of the human being is full of labor. Whether you want to live like a believer or live like a kafir, doesn't matter, you're still going to have to work. You're still going to have problems. You're still going to deal with stuff in life. So your life is created in struggle. Why not make it a struggle that will benefit you here and the next life? Instead of just struggling, so it benefits you here and has no benefit for you in the next life. And why should you have concern for the next life? Allah Azza wa Jalla said, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. He went further a few surahs later. We created the human being in the best possible form. He was designed to achieve high things. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to achieve those high things because what do we find in this surah? إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Despite that high noble status he was given, most human beings were not able to live up to that nobility. Allah Azza wa Jal makes a lot of comments about the human being with the kind of declaration that is found in the phrase إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ. This is not the only place in the Quran where we find the words إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ. This commentary about the human being occurs many times. What does إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ mean? The human being is no doubt something. Allah is going to say something, make some commentary about the human being. We found several variations in the Quran of إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَكَفُورٌ مُبِينٌ. No doubt the human being is openly and clearly extremely ungrateful and in extreme denial in regards to his master. We found إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ. The human being is created weak, pathetic, frail. Some things happen to him, he gets overjoyed. Something bad happens to him, he loses all hope. Allah says, كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى. No doubt it is the human being that truly rebels. It is the human being that rebels. And the language suggests, don't blame it on anyone else. Don't say society made me rebel, shaitan made me rebel. Nobody else. Human being himself, he rebels. Then he says, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لِرَبِّهِ لَكَنُودٌ. Know that the human being, in regards to his master especially, is very disloyal. All these commentaries about the human being, he's ungrateful, he's created weak, he rebels, he's disloyal to his master. This is all commentary. But what's the conclusion? The conclusion is here. Inna al-insana lafi khusr. It's not an adjective of the human being. It's not a description of his behavior. It's now the consequence. What is the net result of all of these, misbehaviors? The net result is he is immersed in a state of loss. Important considerations before we get into the surah itself. One more is the general principle versus the exception. Whenever you use the word illa, except, you are talking about what we call in English an exception. What is in majority? What is more in number? The rule or the exception? The rule is in more number and the exception is very few. You say, everybody came except that one. When you use except, you're talking about one or two or a few that didn't come, everybody else is here. Now in this surah, what is the rule? What is the majority situation? وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. That's the rule. Human beings are immersed in loss, in doom. What's the exception? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. By presenting the exception as those who believe and do good deeds, etc., that we're going to study, by presenting them in the form of an exception, what we're learning here is this is not going to be a lot of people. This is going to be few. The vast majority of human beings will be in loss. That's the rule. And the exceptions will be a few. May Allah Azza wa Jal make us from the exceptions. So now, we talked about Surah At-Teen having more of a style of tabshir, and this one having more of a style of indar, meaning good news versus warning. The other thing that's very important to highlight is Surah At-Teen mentioned ajr. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ. Right? This surah doesn't mention any ajr. Ajr means reward. There Allah said, a reward that will never be discontinued, a reward that will never be forbidden from them. He uses those words. But in this surah, there's no mention of reward. The only mention is human beings are in loss except these people. But He doesn't say, and these people will get Jannah, and these people will get everlasting life, all of it, nothing. No mention of what they will get. The only thing that's mentioned is, these people are failures, and these people escaped. These people escaped. You know what this is? We call this, in simple English, we call this passing grades. Somebody gets an 85, somebody gets a 95, somebody gets 100, somebody gets an A, a B, or a C. But you know the guy who barely survived and didn't get the F? There's the F, right? Let's say, I don't know, in New York it's 65. Is that the failing grade here in Texas? I don't know. But 65 is your passing grade, basically. You get a 64, you failed. You get a 64, you failed. Now whether you get a 34, a 30, a 0, a 25, all of them get what grade? F. That's all an F. The only thing that will survive is 65 or above. You understand? Like passing grade or above. This surah is not talking about higher levels of success. Other surahs talk about success. They deal with what jannat, what gardens, what treasures. That's the subject matter of other surahs. This surah, the subject of it is who is not a failure. Now I put it in those terms because I want you to understand. This surah describes the bare minimum, the bottom line. Who is above the failing grade? Because anybody who didn't meet this minimum requirement is obviously what? A failure. They're a failure. So this surah is not about earning Jannah. This surah is more about escaping hellfire. This surah is not about success. It's more about survival. Which leads me to this very, very critical discussion that we need to have today. What is the difference between talking about success and talking about survival? My contention is this surah is not talking about success. What's it talking about? Survival. What's the difference between the two? You see, survival is something, when your survival is being questioned, you forget everything else. When you're drowning, when you're in a building with fire in it, right? When there's a danger headed your way, when your survival is in question, you forget everything. And when your survival is in question, there's no time for you to talk about your what? Success. There's no need to talk about success. I mean, if you're working in an office and you're talking to your boss about getting a promotion, what are you talking about? Success. But the building went on fire, and you say, let me finish talking about my promotion first. I haven't just finished negotiating with. Does that make any sense? No. Because you can't talk about success unless you've already secured your own survival. You understand? So before we talk about higher levels of paradise and higher success, what do we have to ensure we're okay with? At least we're surviving, we're not in the failing grade. That's the urgency of this surah. The bare minimum. The survival. And it doesn't make any sense for someone to talk about or be concerned with anything else other than survival if they are not meeting the conditions of that survival. Imagine you have to get out of that building and there are 4 doors and all of those doors are locked. Until you unlock all 4, you shouldn't be worried about anything else. These are the 4 locks. Al-Iman, al-A'mal al-Salihah, Tawasib al-Haq, Tawasib al-Sabr. These are the locks to your survival. You have to unlock all of these things so you and I can survive. That's the scenario that's being drawn for us in this profound surah. Also, this surah proves something very, very important. I keep saying there are 4 conditions. One of the benefits of knowing that there are 4 conditions is that this surah proves that being good on your own is not enough. Being good for yourself is not enough. Our deen is not just a concern with ourselves, it's also a concern with other people. And you're not doing it for other people, for them, you're actually doing it for yourself. And this surah is the proof. Why? Because Allah said, you are in loss unless you do, yes, iman and amilu salihat. That's for who? That's what I do. But tawasi bil haq, getting the truth to other people. Telling each other to be perseverant and remain committed. Is that about you or other people now? That's others. And tafa'ul in Arabic, from which tawasi comes, it has ishtirak in it, people working together. So it proves, it actually necessitates the concern for others in this quest for our own salvation. Ash-Shawkani rahimahullah commented, it includes ad-du'a ila ad-din, wal-nasiha fi ad-din, wal-amr bil-ma'ruf, wal-nahy anil-munkar. This tawasi bil-haq, tawasi bil-sabr, what does it include? You're calling people to the deen. You are giving people counsel and advice, that's part of tawasi bil-haq. You're enjoining and you're commanding to the good, you're forbidding and standing up against evil. This is all part of surviving yourself. You can't just be a Muslim in your own little circle and not be concerned with the evils and the problems outside. You have to take them on and at least speak out against them. A few other things, inshallah, when we get to the nitty gritty of the surah. But one last comment about the overview, and we get into some other features of the wording in this surah. One is the comment of Ash-Shafi'i. We find 2 things he said. One of them is لو تدبر الناس هذه السورة لوسعتهم. If people only reflected on this surah, it would encompass them. It would be enough for them. And then another place he says لو لم ينزل من القرآن سواها لكفت الناس. Had there nothing been revealed in the Quran except this surah, it would have been enough for people. He sees something, Ash-Shafi'i rahimahullah, incredible mind in our history, he sees something in this surah that makes him say, this is enough for people. If they only pondered on the lessons of this surah. What is in this surah that's so heavy that he would say something like that, subhanAllah? It's a very heavy thing to say. I want to mention just some overview things. So within that, I want to say, one of the comments is the difference between khusr, which is used here, and 2 other words that occur in the Quran that are similar. There's the word khasara, okay? Like in Surah Nuh. وَاتَّبَعُوا مَنْ لَمْ يَزِدْ مَالُهُ وَوَلَدُهُ إِلَّا خَسَارًا. Not إِلَّا خُسْرًا, but إِلَّا خَسَارًا. So there's one word that's a variation of khusr. Another word that occurs in the Quran is khusran. Khusran. So you got 3 words now. You got khusr, you got khasara, and you got khusran. What's the difference between them, and what's the benefit of using khusr in this surah? First of all, let's talk about the word khasara. Khasara means a loss above a pre-existing loss. There's already loss, and you're adding to that loss. That is called khasara. If Allah had used that word, then we would have already been in trouble, and we're adding to that trouble. But Allah actually, by using khusr, a lesson we're learning is we're not in trouble. We're not in trouble, but we put ourselves in trouble. It's not like we were in trouble to begin with. So let's see how khasara, this word which means basically loss above a pre-existing loss, how it's used in the Quran. وَنُنَزِّلْ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَلَا يَزِيدُ الظَّالِمِينَ إِلَّا خَسَارًا. وَلَا يَزِيدُ الظَّالِمِينَ إِلَّا خَسَارًا. We do not increase wrongdoers in nothing more but loss. Wrongdoers, are they already in loss? Yes. And Allah increases them. You see the way it's being used? Then we find وَلَا يَزِيدُ الْكَافِرِينَ كُفْرُهُمْ إِلَّا خَسَارًا. The disbelief of their disbelief of disbelievers, it will not increase them in anything but more loss. Loss above the loss they already have. What's the first loss they have? Is kufr. Then what is the kufr above? The loss above that is the crimes they do against the believers. That's loss above loss. Their kufr was enough to send them to hellfire. But when they put the believers to trial, then they're digging their hole even deeper. So the word khasara is appropriate. Similarly, we find, as I mentioned in Surah Nuh, وَاتَّبَعُوا, and they followed مَنْ لَمْ يَزِدْهُ مَالُهُ وَوَلَدُهُ إِلَّا خَسَارًا, the one who wouldn't increase him or his wealth or his children in anything more than loss. In other words, they ended up following people that are losers to begin with, and following them would make them even more of a loser. Now, this is the first benefit of not using khasar in this surah as opposed to using khusr. But then there's the word khusran, very powerful word. Khusran is what's called sighatul mubalagha, hyperbolized noun in English, an empowered noun. This is also used in the Quran. Khusran means incredible loss, excessive loss, unimaginable loss. You have to empower the meaning of that word because it's got an at the end. When you put an at the end of a word in Arabic, it empowers it. Like, you know how we say ar-Rahman? It's not just merciful, it's incredibly merciful. When you say ghadban, it's not just angry, it's furious, it's enraged. So when you say khusran, it's empowered, loss. It's amazing amount of loss. Let's see how that's used in the Quran. Allah says, خَسِرَ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ ذَلِكَ هُوَ الْخُسْرَانُ الْمُبِينُ. He lost dunya and akhirah. That is ultimate loss. Isn't that the ultimate loss? What's so bad about that situation? It's not something light. He didn't just lose one thing, he lost both things. Ad-dunya wal-akhirah. So this is loss upon loss. This is the ultimate loss. Al-khusran al-mubin. Similarly, we find the word being used. Allah says, قُلْ إِنَّ الْخَاسِرِينَ الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَهْلِيهِمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. The true losers are those who lost themselves and their families on the day of standing. That is the ultimate loss. So the real loss is not in this dunya, real loss is in the akhirah, the ultimate one. But nonetheless, there is loss taking place here also. But it's nothing compared to the loss that is coming. So because it's still loss, but not the ultimate loss, the word that is balanced and appropriate in this surah is إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. If it was in the hellfire, then what would the word be? The khusran. Lafi khusran, because that's the ultimate loss. You couldn't get any worse loss than that. So it's a perfect choice of word between the two kinds of words that are available to us. Now we're going to read something that al-Bayhaqi rahimahullah comments on, something really, really beautiful in regards to this surah. He says, كان الرجلان من أصحاب النبي إذا التقيا لم يتفرقا حتى يقرأ أحدهما إلى الآخر وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. He says the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in, whenever they would meet two of them, they would never leave each other's company unless they would say to each other, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. In other words, they would recite the surah to each other. They would recite it to each other before they would depart from each other. Why? They felt this is something extremely important to remind the other of constantly. This is not something you can learn once about and move on. And this is really what I want to spend the rest of our session today on. Is the difference between studying the Quran academically and learning the grammar of the words, the meanings of the words, the different qira'at, what the mufassirun have said, all this knowledge, all this information. When you get too tied down with the information and the technicalities, sometimes you lose the power of the message itself. In the end, Allah is talking to you and me. We should have all that knowledge. We should seek to acquire that knowledge. We should seek to have deeper understanding of the Quran. That is part of understanding the Quran. But we should never lose sight of the fact that in the end, Allah is talking to me like, somebody concerned about you talks to you. And somebody concerned about you gives you advice. Allah is giving you advice. And Allah is not talking about anybody else. He's talking about you and me. فِيهِ ذِكْرُكُمْ. In it is your mention. Allah is talking about you. He's not talking about anyone else. When you keep this in mind, we learn something about this surah. Talking about it is very easy. Talking about this surah and its demands is very easy. Internalizing them is very difficult. Extremely difficult. And that's the essence of the surah that I want to capture today, inshallah ta'ala. And we'll have a detailed study of each piece of the surah. It just deserves that much attention. It deserves that much attention. So we'll capture the essence of it, or try to capture the essence of it today, inshallah ta'ala. First and foremost, we talked about the difference between two things, success and survival. We talked a little bit about survival, but we didn't talk about the other thing, which is what? Success. Every single human being, in their head, they have an understanding of what it means to be successful. Every single human. Doesn't have to be Muslim. Every human being. Doesn't have to speak your own language. Every culture, every society, every man, woman, and child aspires to something that they consider success. For your kid, it may be getting a good grade, success. For you, it may be a promotion or getting a job, or making a lot more money than you do now, or getting a certain car, or marrying a certain person, or buying a house. Whatever it may be, there's something in your head that you consider success. And there are some people you look at, and you don't even have to think about it. As soon as you see them, the thought that crosses your mind is, that guy's pretty successful. That one's pretty successful. How did they become so successful? I mean, in other words, you don't have to say it. It's in your head. And let me show you a personal experiment you can conduct. You're driving down a neighborhood, a fancy neighborhood, and you see a really beautiful house. Does your eye stay on it for a couple of seconds? Just, at least a couple of seconds. You may get distracted from it, maybe you even pull over. Whoa, that's nice. Because in your head, you're thinking, that person reached one milestone of success. It's in our head. That is something to aspire for. That's a kind of success. You're walking to the masjid from the parking lot, and you see a really nice car. Really nice car. Does your eye stay on it for a couple of seconds? Does the thought cross? You look at the interior just a little more. Even navigation, wow, that's nice. The eye goes. It's something in your head that says, this has to do with success. Now, religiously, we can say, no, Jannah is success. Dunya is not success. We know that. I'm not talking about what you say. I'm talking about what goes on in your head. When you look at stuff. When you think about stuff. And kids are a lot more honest than we are, So I did this experiment with kids. And this is true of all of us, really. But I did this experiment with kids. I said, okay guys, if we're walking down the street and we see a guy who's homeless, he's living in a cardboard box, right? And next to him is a gate, and in the gate there's a guy who lives in a mansion. Really wealthy guy. Who do you think is successful? What do the kids say? Honest answer. They said the guy in the mansion is successful. The guy who's in the cardboard box is a failure. The one who graduated high school is a success. The one who dropped out is what? A failure. The one who won the election is a success. The one who lost is what? A failure. We measure success and failure in these terms. The one who got the job is a success. The one who lost the job is a failure. The one whose business thrived is a success. The one whose business tanked is a failure. This is how we measure success and failure. It's normal. It's totally normal to think like that. But we are learning something very, very radical in this surah. We are learning that all of these are not the measures of success or failure. Having a lot of wealth, having things that you want to aspire for, having them is no sign that you're successful, and not having them is no sign that you're a failure. They have nothing to do with success and nothing to do with failure. Now look, let's take some ancient examples. You know how I don't know if they still have the show. I saw it at a friend's house one time. They called it Celebrity Cribs. I don't know if you've ever seen it. But they go to famous people's homes and show you their homes. They're like the custom multi-million-dollar homes and stuff. Well, think about this. Who had the celebrity crib in ancient Egypt at the time of Musa alayhi salam? Fir'aun, huh? You could see his house from miles away. I mean, that's some pretty good architecture. It's still around. Right? It's pretty solid foundation. It's a world monument. One of the wonders of this is his crib. And yet, is he a success? One of the biggest examples of failure. When somebody's been able to save a lot of money, we say, this guy's doing okay. He's not in debt. He's pretty successful. He's got a good retirement plan. Look at Qarun in the Quran. Does he have a nice, big enough vault that people have to carry the keys to? Right? His vault is so big, forget the vault. Key has to be carried by multiple guards to go open the vault. SubhanAllah. But horrible failure. Then on the other hand, you have, if somebody gets deported from a country, you would consider that a failure. It's pretty embarrassing and humiliating, isn't it? Was Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam expelled, literally deported from Mecca? He was. If somebody doesn't have a home to live in and they have to live out in the woods, you know how in between your developments here, there's some patch of woods and some guy's living in those woods. You would call that a failure. That's pretty pathetic. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam had to live in a cave for a stretched period, no food, no plate, eating off of shrubs. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The greatest example of success, and yet he's living, and if you saw somebody living like that today, you would not think success. That's not what would cross your mind. If somebody gets kicked out of their home, they become homeless. It's a failure. Ibrahim alayhi salam, does he get expelled from his home? He does. And yet, one of the greatest examples of success in human history. What are we learning from these examples? We're learning that the way we think about success and failure is not the way Allah wants us to think about success and failure. It's completely different. And then when we start rearranging our thinking, we learn something very critical about the society in which we live. And all of this is the message of this surah, by the way. In this society and in the world today, there are certain things that are defined as success, and you are told that that is success over and over and over and over again. In other words, the wrong definition of success is bombarded at you constantly. You cannot so much as turn your computer on, and a banner ad will show you what kind of car you should get. And based on your searches, these are the stores that want to give you, a discount. And the billboard will show you what kind of house you should buy. Advertising in every way, shape, or form being pumped towards you. Even among our parents and our elders, among our youth, what college you should go to, what kind of job you should get, which neighborhood you should move to. Constantly we are being told what is success, what is success, what is success. Over and over and over again. And even if something is wrong, but it's said to you over and over and over again, what starts happening? You start believing it's true. You start getting affected by it. If constantly people around you are telling you and convincing you that such a thing is success, then the other thing that happens is if everybody thinks that's success, I must be crazy to think no. If somebody says, Brother Nouman, this is an interesting concept, but nobody thinks like this. You have the right to say, nobody thinks like this. Seriously. Get real. That's exactly right. Just because nobody thinks like this, we have assumed that it's invalid. If this was so true, everybody would think like this. But the thing is, what we're learning is truth is not sweet. Truth is bitter. And it's not about any action yet. I'm not telling you about any actions. We're just talking about a change of attitude. An attitude towards this worldly life. That's all we're talking about. A change of attitude. This world has nothing to do with success. This is not to say, by the way, to avoid confusion, this is not to say that this world is evil. After all, Allah says, خَلَقَ لَكُم مَا فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا. He created for you whatever is on this earth altogether. It was for you. It was made for you. But then how do we reconcile these two things? What we learn is having wealth is not a bad thing. Having a nice car is not a bad thing. Having nice clothes is not a bad thing. But if you think that is success, then you have failed. What you aspire towards is not dunya. Having dunya is not a problem. Loving dunya is the problem. Allah Azza wa Jalla doesn't talk against the one who has dunya. He talks about the one who is influenced by dunya. وَآثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا. He was, the worldly life, he gave preference to it. If this becomes your preference, you could be very wealthy and still not be in loss. You could do that. And you could be very poor and still have dunya in your heart and you're still a loser. You're still in loss. This is, before we talk about anything material or on the outside, the first concern here is what is on the inside. So that's the issue of success versus survival. And we talked a little bit now about the rearranging our idea, our concept of what is success. Now that we've come to this point, the lesson to learn in this surah is all human beings are in a desperate need to survive. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Human beings are drowned in loss. Human beings are lost. They're in loss, immersed in it. What does that tell you? That tells you that there are no exceptions. There are no exceptions. Allah doesn't say إِنَّ الْكَافِرَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Some Mufassirun commented, al-insan ay al-kafir. We'll talk about that. Like the human being, it's referring to the kafir. It's referring to the kafir if he is in khusr at the end. But we find narrations of the Sahaba who were concerned about the first part of Surah al-Asr. When Surah al-Asr was revealed, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Those who only heard that much said, what are we going to do? Until the exception came and gave them relief. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. So this exception becomes critical because this becomes a matter of our survival. This becomes a matter of our survival. And if we don't address this, then there's no point talking about success. There is no success then. We have to rearrange our thinking in regards to the demands that are being placed on us in terms of this surah. The last thing I want to share with you in today's session, inshallah ta'ala, is imagery. And we'll build on this imagery, inshallah ta'ala, in our next session and go and finish the word by word study and analysis of this surah. And the imagery that I want to share with you is one that will help you understand the larger concept of Surah al-Asr. Imagine with me that you are drowning. And you are unconscious. Two things. You're drowning and you're unconscious. Do you have a lot of time? If you're drowning and you're unconscious, do you have a lot of time? No, you don't have a lot of time. Which means your time is running out. And you know in Arabic, what word is used for when time is running out? The word for that is al-Asr. Al-Asr literally means time that is running out. It's the last part of the day when the day is running out. It's time of Asr prayer. Okay, Asr literally comes from asir, juice that is squeezed out, time that's being squeezed out of your hands. Asr al-thawba even it's used. That you take a cloth that is drenched in water, and when you squish it like this, all the water comes out. Asra as a verb is used like that, right? To squeeze it out. So Allah talks about this time. You're drowning, you're unconscious, your time is running out. What's the first thing you need to do to be able to survive if you're in that position? If you hope to survive, what's the first thing you're going to need? What do you think? Wake up. That's the first thing you're going to need. If you're unconscious, then you're finished. The very first condition has to be you have to wake up. And even if you were in the most wonderful dream, and in your dream you were enjoying the greatest success, you're driving a Ferrari down, they have these car commercials with the hills and the highways on the side, the water on the other side, right? You're in one of those cars, the top's been dropped off, and you're just cruising along the highway, enjoying life. That's your dream. But when you wake up, what do you realize? You're drowning. You're underwater. That's the first condition. You have to wake up. Once you do wake up, you say, oh man, this is a nasty reality and I was enjoying such a good dream. I should go back to sleep. If you do that, what kind of person would you be? Insane. You'd be insane. Or someone at least who has no courage to accept reality. Because they found reality to be very difficult, they decided they're going to put themselves back to sleep even though they woke up. Does this person, if he drowned, can he blame anybody else? The one who woke up and went back to sleep? You think? Someone who never woke up, maybe, right? But the one who woke up said, this is not good. And they went back to sleep. They have no one to blame but who? Themselves. They have no one to blame but themselves. Now, let's imagine that they did wake up. What do you have to do next? Oh, it's pretty bad, I'm drowning. Even if you don't know how to swim, will you not use every muscle in your body to make certain kinds of motions to go towards the surface? Wouldn't you do that? And you will make certain kinds of motions that make you go further down, and certain kinds of motions that will make you go up. And once you discover which ones help you go up, you will only do those, right? You will do those. In other words, the first thing was you have to wake up. The second was you have to swim. You have to do something to try to get to the surface. When you got to the surface, you gasped for air and you got pulled back down. You got pulled back down. And you know who you got pulled back down? You won't believe this. There's a chain around your foot and your relative, your cousin, is sleeping and he dragged you down. And now you're drowning because of your sleeping cousin. What do you have to do now? You got to wake him up. And you're not even waking him up because you want to save him. Who are you waking him up for? Maybe you want to save him. Maybe you don't even like your cousin. I don't know. Right? But what's the point? The point is you're trying to wake him up because if you don't wake him up, who's also going to drown? You yourself. So you wake him up and he says, man, I was driving a Ferrari. You woke me up for no reason. I'm going back to sleep. Forget you. Can you just say, okay, well, I didn't like you anyway. Suit yourself. Can't do that. If he goes to sleep again, what are you going to do? No, man, wake up. Let's go. We can't give up. You can't not accept reality. And you have to keep trying to wake him up until he finally says, okay, fine, what do we do? He says, you say to him, let's swim together. Both of you come up together. The third time, you both get pulled down by your grandmother, by your aunt, by your neighbor, by your son, by your daughter. Does the process continue? The process continue? There's a 4-part process to this people surviving. The first was they had to wake up themselves. Then they had to try to swim. Then they had to tell other people that they're tied to, this is the truth. Let's go. And even if they got tired and one of them said, man, I can't do this anymore. We've been doing this now over and over again. I don't know if I can do it anymore. And the other one says, no, We are all going to survive together. You have to do this. Come on, let's go, let's go, let's go. Keep going, keep going. You ever seen those kinds of movies where they're trying to escape from some army and one of them gets tired and says, I can't run anymore. And what do the others do? Come on, let's go. We can do this, we can do it. And they get him to run anyway, even though he thinks he can't run anymore. They work with each other because their survival depends on each other. They work together desperately. What does Allah say at the end of this surah? First He says, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي وَالْعَصْرِ. First of all, time's running out. Then He says, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. I'll translate it, human beings are drowned in loss. You see the parallel? Human beings are drowned in loss. What's the exception? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ. Those who believed. Believed what? Allah didn't say, آمَنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَمَلَائِكَتِهِ وَكُتُبِهِ وَرُسُلِهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَالْقَدْرِ خَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ مِنَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى وَالْبَعْثِ بَعْدَ. Nothing. He didn't mention anything. Even though all of those things are included. According to the siyaq of the surah, the context of the surah, what is the first thing these people have to believe? That they're in loss. That they're drowning. And if they do come to believe that, and they correct their iman, what's necessarily going to happen? They're going to swim and move upwards. How does Allah describe this action? وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. They do good things. They do things that help reconcile the situation. By the way, salih is an adjective here, salihat, jama' mu'annath salim, which is literally means that which corrects something. Something was wrong and it corrects it. So they do actions that correct the situation. Literally like the guy trying to swim. But because they were tied to other people, what else did they have to do? وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. They had to tell the other the truth. And it's not even أخبروا عن it. They told them about the truth. No. They had to wake him up and let's go, we have to go. No matter, and over again. Tawasi even has takrar in it. It has repetition in it. Over and over again they said, this is the truth, this is the truth, this is the truth. You know why? Because the people you're trying to save, even if you wake them up temporarily for 20 minutes, 30 minutes during a khutbah, guess what happens when the khutbah is done? They go back to sleep. They start drowning again. So what do you have to do? You have to go and wake them up again. Then they get sleepy again. Then you got to wake them up again. This is tawasi bil haqq. And you might get tired of doing it. You might become impatient. So Allah also adds, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. You got to keep doing it. Sabr means consistency, constancy, perseverance, patience. You got to remain on point. You got to keep doing this. Because your survival depends on it. In the end, if you do all of these things but you have no patience and you give up, you drown too. So even if you had iman and you had good deeds and you told people about the truth but you didn't have sabr, you still drowned. So how many conditions do you have to fulfill to survive? All four. All four conditions are required. They're critical and they're necessary. Which is why there's a wa in between them. You see the logical progression from iman to amilu salihat to tawasaw bil haqq to tawasaw bil sabr, beautifully articulated in this surah. That this is the summarized message of Surah al-Asr. What Allah Azza wa Jalla is talking about is our own survival. Our own, literally our own escape from the hellfire. Our own escape from impending loss in this world and then in the next. But know this surah is about this dunya. This is first and foremost, this is about this dunya. How do we know this? Allah Azza wa Jalla used the word wal-asr. Time that is running out. In which world is time running out? This world or the next world? In this world, time is running out. In the next world, there's no time running out. Either you're fi jannatin, aw fi narin abadan. Either you're in a garden, timeless, or in the fire, timeless. Allahumma la taj'alna min ashabin nar. May Allah not make us from the people of fire. Last comment, inshallah ta'ala, and I will conclude bi'idhnillah in regards to this surah. I want to give it this much time and importance because again, I feel its message is so powerful and so critical that all of us in our families need to understand it. And this is a surah, wallahi, it's a tragedy that we know this surah, and the irony is if you're late for the movie, and salah is coming in the way, or you got to go play basketball and it's salah time, you got to quickly get rid of the salah, what do? You recite that time is running out and you're in loss. The irony of the whole thing, right? Wal-asr, because it's quick. Short and sweet, hit and run salah and you go. Right? We have, in our homes, we have big portraits that say, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ, right next to the big screen TV or the video game console we're playing for hours and hours, and it says right there in our face, human beings are in loss. And what's their greatest loss? Time. That the time is being drained away from all of them. SubhanAllah. This is the surah to understand, and it's basically at the heart of the entire Qur'an. The entire Qur'an. The last comment I wanted to make before you, which is a comprehensive overview comment, the way this surah is understood as a summary of the entire Quran is incredible. First of all, Allah takes an oath. Are there places in the Quran where Allah takes an oath? Sure. This is the last of them. This is the last of them. In the series of oaths in the Quran, this is the final one. The second thing. When we find, in this surah Allah says, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. He talks about the loss of the human being. Human beings are in trouble. Is this not one of the key messages of the Prophet ﷺ? Human beings are in trouble? When he came up on the mount and he addressed the people, did he not warn them about the day of judgment? Did he not warn them about a danger that is coming, that they're in loss, they're in trouble? This is one of the central messages of this book, of this messages of Islam altogether. Then there are 4 exceptions. What's the first one? Iman. Iman. The Quran, in much of the Quran is talking about what? Iman. Then it says good deeds. Our deen, there's Iman and then there's what? Good deeds. And then there's the life and the struggle of the Prophet ﷺ, which is tawasi bil haqq and tawasi bil sabr. So the entire manhaj, the entire methodology of Rasulullah ﷺ is captured in these 4 words. Anywhere you study in the Quran, anywhere you study in the seerah, anywhere you study in the sunnah, you will find one of 4 things. Either you will find iman, or you'll find a'mal as-salihah, or you'll find tawasi bil haqq, or you'll find tawasi bil sabr. You'll find one of these 4 things all over the Quran, or all over the sunnah. It's a summary of the entire deen captured in very, very few words. It's miraculously beautiful. May Allah Azza wa Jal give us a comprehensive, complete understanding of Surah al-Asr and of the entire Quran. May Allah Azza wa Jal enable us to embed its powerful message into our hearts and to be able to communicate that to others, especially family and friends, that Allah may enter it into their hearts as well. Allahumma nawwir qulubana bi nur al-Quran. Barakallahu li wa lakum fil Quran al-Hakim. Wa nafa'ni wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-Hakim. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
To download more lectures, learn more about our project, and to help support it, visit www.bayyinah.com/dream. That's BAYYINAH/dream. You are free to share these recordings with family and friends. Thank you and Jazakumullahu khairan for helping us make our dream a reality.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. اللهم اجعلنا من الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. ثم أما بعد. Inshallah ta'ala, we're starting our second session on Surah al-Asr. The first one was on Sunday, and that was mostly the overview and a broader look at the contents of this profound surah that most, if not all of us, have memorized. It is made up of 3 ayat. It's one of the shortest surahs in the Quran, and something very, very commonly repeated and known. Inshallah ta'ala, today we're going to complete the overview and then move on to the word-by-word analysis and some commentary from great ulama of our history that have pondered upon this surah and written some great things in their tafsir in regards to it. The first thing we're going to talk about today is the fact that this is one of the surahs that belongs to a score of surahs that begin with oaths, a qasam. Allah Azza wa Jal takes an oath in many, many, many surahs. And in this series we have talked about this before. The benefit of Allah taking an oath, what rhetorical purpose does it have? What's the purpose of Allah swearing? The rough translation, if I was to say, wal-Asr, I swear by time. That's a very coarse translation, but still, the point that's coming across is Allah Himself is taking an oath. He's swearing by something. What's the benefit of Allah Azza wa Jal swearing? There are a few. One of them is to acknowledge the grandeur, the magnificent nature of something. Whatever Allah swears by is something profound and magnificent. This is one opinion held by Mufassirun. This is certainly the case here, or part of the case here. Why? Because in many hadith, for example, لا تسبوا الدهر فإن الله هو الدهر. Very famous hadith, and other types, this type of hadith, they're found in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. They're very, very common. don't curse time, because Allah Himself is ad-dahr. He is time. Allah describes Himself as the timeless, right? So don't curse time. So it has to do with divine attribution, time itself. So we're not supposed to say things like, "Oh man, that was a bad day," right? Or "This was a terrible year." You know how they use these adjectives for time? It's very explicit words of the Messenger ﷺ forbidding us from doing that. So one way this has been understood is al-Asr huwa ad-dahr. Allah swore by time, Asr, and the almost synonymous term to that is dahr, which also occurs in the Quran. So it's something that is magnificent. That's something that is profound, something that demands reflection. In other words, Allah is calling the human being's attention to reflect on the passage of time. That's one meaning. The second is that we talked about the object of the oath and the subject of the oath, the muqsam bihi and muqsam alayhi, the Arabic terminology. What I mean by that, I'll repeat it very, very briefly. If I say to you, "I swear by Allah, I didn't do that." I said this long sentence, "I swear by Allah, I didn't do that." The object of my oath is the word Allah. And the subject is what? I didn't do that. Right? So there's the object and the subject. In this surah, there's also the object of the oath, wal-Asr. What's the object? Al-Asr. What's the subject? Innal insana lafi khusr. Allah says He swears by time, or by the passage of time, and then He declares that all human beings are immersed in a state of loss. So there's the object being time, and the subject being the loss of the human being. When this happens, typically in the Quran and also in ancient Arabic rhetoric, the object is actually a proof of the subject. That's one of the ways it's understood, that the object is a proof of the subject. It's a dalil for the subject. In other words, if you say human beings are in loss, and somebody says, "What's your proof?" Well, in this surah, what's the number one proof that human beings are in loss? That the human beings are immersed in bankruptcy? Time itself is proof. What is the one thing human beings are losing all the time? Time. Right? Where this is an asset we can never keep. We can never hold on to this hour, this minute, this second. It is leaving us, and it will continue to leave us. It is not something you can store and use later on. It is something that, and by the way, we have lost a lot of time already. You look back in your life and you say, there are so many opportunities I could have taken advantage of and I didn't. I could have used my time better, but I didn't. I had this opportunity and that opportunity, but I didn't make the most of my time. So there's this regret about time that has already passed away. And you should use that regret to transform the way you're going to use your time in the future. But essentially, Allah has tied two things together. The idea of thinking about human loss and He associated that with the passage of time. So one is the proof of the other. Another way al-Asr is understood is, it's not just, and we'll see this later on as is commented in Ash-Shafi, is that Asr is also, it refers to the life of nations, the zaman, the duration of the life of an entire nation. You know how entire nations rise and then they fall? Right? So when Allah uses the word Asr, it doesn't just refer to the passage of a time of a day, only, or the life of one person, but the life of an entire nation. And these rises and falls of nations themselves are proof that human beings are in loss. History itself becomes a proof that human beings are in loss. And that's captured by Allah saying, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Then you go further and we find that this is the second and very important concept as far as the relationship between muqsam bihi and muqsam alayhi, is that the oath, that the object of the oath is a witness for the subject of the oath. This is different now. We said two things. The object is a proof of the subject, that's one thing. The second is the object is a witness for the subject. In other words, Allah calls a witness against this subject. In other words, how we understand that now in Surah al-Asr is Allah is bringing time as a witness to something. What is time supposed to witness? That no doubt human beings are immersed in loss. What does that mean? That means many, many, many human beings. And as we study the exact commentary of the Mufassirun, this will become more clear. But to make it very brief and simple right now, for now at least, is the following. You and I, and humanity at large, they run after things. We run after things that are actually distractions from our real purpose in life. That should remind you of a surah we studied, the one before this. Alhaakum at-takathur. It deluded you. The want of more, the mutually shared urge to get more and more. It distracted you from your real purpose. Most humanity is distracted running after the wrong thing. They're running after the wrong thing. Now, Are we the first people to run after wealth? Or to run after a house? Or to run after getting married to a beautiful woman? Or this or that? Whatever it may be. Are we the first to run after these things? Or were there people before that ran after these things too? There were. And people ran after them thinking that they are going to have success. When they get them, they will have success. And time, Allah made time a witness that people came and they ran after these things and they failed. And then other people came and they ran after these things and they failed again. And other people came and did the same thing again. Thousands upon thousands of years, hundreds upon hundreds of generations, one after another, the same drama over and over again. And one creation of Allah has been watching it happen. It's witness to this thing over and over again. It's almost as though when it sees our struggles, it says, here we go again. Here's another one. So in other words, time is a witness to the tragedy of human life, the tragedy of the human beings' aspirations headed in the wrong direction. So time is being brought as a witness against us, or a witness to the tragedy of the human being. And finally, the word al-Asr, just from when we get into linguistic analysis, again, this will become more clear. We're still in the overview right now. And in the overview, one of the meanings of Asr is time that is running out. Or the last ebb of time, the last portion of time. Even Salat al-Asr is the last part of the day, right? When time's running out. And classically speaking, Asr was the time in ancient society, especially in Arab society, when the merchant and the traveler, they're always in a hurry. Because when it's nightfall, there's a lot of danger and they can't protect their assets and things like that. So the most hustle and bustle happens when? At Asr time. That's the busiest, most urgent time. And by using that as an oath, there are other times of day that Allah uses for an oath also. He says, وَالصُّبْحِ إِذَا أَسْفَرْ وَالْفَجْرِ وَلَيَالٍ عَشْرٍ وَالضُّحَى. These are different times of the day. Allah uses different times of the day to swear by. Even وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا تَجَلَّى. Right? The daytime. But specifically the use of Asr is a time that is associated with a sense of urgency. In other words, the next lesson we're learning here in this surah as we go on is, whatever Allah has to say, the time for you and me to react is not a lot of time. There's a state of emergency. We need to act quickly because the dawn of our life has set upon us. The sunset of our life is at bay. It's around the corner. So we need to act now. It's this idea of time running out, the timer ticking away. That's being captured in just the words al-Asr. So this last benefit of this oath is a sense of urgency. And one alim, he compared, Mufti Muhammad Shafi among others, compared the struggle of the human being that is depicted in Surah Al-Asr to the one who is trying to sell ice. In ancient times they didn't have freezers and stuff like that, right? So the ice vendor, he doesn't have a lot of time and it's melting away. And he has to make use of these sales and get the product out to the customer in a certain time. And if that time goes away, then all of that effort is gone to waste. So he has this sense of urgency to accomplish what he needs to accomplish. The other part of the overview, inshallah, we'll talk more about the middle ayah later on, but about the last ayah, one thing for now. Commonly, the last ayah of Surah Al-Asr is understood as having 4 components. Of course, it's very easy to see that. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, number 1, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, number 2, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, number 3, and وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, number 4. 4 conditions. The first condition being those who believe, those who act righteously or do righteous deeds. The third being they enjoin to the best of their ability and to counsel one another with truth, and then also doing the same with perseverance. These are the 4 conditions that are mentioned. But one of the things we're going to learn today as part of the overview is that these 4 things are actually one thing. They seem like they are 4 things, but they are lazim wa malzoom. They are necessarily connected to each other. They are actually inseparable. And actually all of the rest is the fruit of the first. Iman. The first thing that's mentioned is Iman. And then there are 3 other things mentioned. But what we're going to learn is if one really has Iman, then the next 3 things are naturally bound to happen. They are bound to happen. And if those things don't happen, guess what's missing? Iman. So if one wants to check if they really have Iman or not, they can check by the minimal standard of Iman set by Surah Al-Asr. What are the consequences of Iman? What happens right after Iman? عَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ تَوَاصِي بِالْحَقِّ تَوَاصِي بِالصَّبْرِ. If those things aren't happening, then there's something missing in Iman. And by the way, all of these 4 are connected in a profound way. Even if you take the second case, عَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. What is after وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ? They act righteously. They enjoin the truth. They don't keep the good to themselves. Now they're enjoying the truth, of which I'm using the cliche translation. The idea of it is to get the truth to others. Tell others to do good too. In other words, if you are truly doing good, it is impossible for you to keep it to yourself. It's impossible. A necessary consequence of that will be you will have to share it with others. That is part of goodness. And then when you do enjoy the truth to others, you will get people that respond to you, and you will get people who hate what you have to say. And when you get people who hate what you have to say, you will necessarily need to develop what? Sabr. You're going to have it. It's a necessary, these are all connected things. One leads to the other, to the other, to the other. And we'll explore more of that as we continue, inshallah ta'ala. This is actually why this surah opens up in most explicit detail these fruits of Iman that usually in the Quran are mentioned in one or two terms. Sometimes Allah says, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. That's enough. Because really the rest is what? Fruits of Iman. Right? So if you understand Iman properly, then the rest is understood. Sometimes He elaborates it a little more and says, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. He'll say two things. But in this surah, He doesn't say two things, He says four things. And if you notice, the last two things, tawasi bil haqq and tawasi bil sabr, are actually deeds in and of themselves. They are deeds. And so, amilu salihat is a deed, amal. And tawasi bil haqq and tawasi bil sabr are also a'mal, amalain. They're both actions too. In other words, what we're learning here is Allah highlighted the two actions. This is what I mentioned last time also. Allah is highlighting the two actions that get overlooked by people when they think about good deeds. The actions that they don't tend to think about when they think about doing good deeds are the ones that are explicitly highlighted, so we understand this is the bare minimum of good deeds that you need to accomplish. That is tawasi bil haqq and tawasi bil sabr included in the discussion. Now, I want to share with you a scenario. And I really benefited from this scenario as my teacher, Dr. Abdul Sami' in one dars, he explained it. I also heard Dr. Asar Ahmed talk about it in detail. I found it very beneficial. And we're going to look at the lessons of Surah al-Asr before we get into the tafsir of the surah itself, from an overview, even from the point of view of a non-Muslim. We'll look at some of the lessons and the logical cohesion of the surah from the point of view of a non-Muslim. Whenever you are brought a problem, a dispute, some issue in life, any decent human being, what is the first thing they will do? The first thing they will do, no matter what dispute is brought to them, is they would demand and they would make efforts to get to the facts of the case. The first thing is to get the facts right. To get to the truth itself. You wouldn't just take it at face value, you would explore it. And the more serious the problem, the more serious your inquiry into getting to the truth. You would have to exhaust yourself in getting to the facts of the matter. Okay, this is the very least requirement of not a believer but of decency. A decent human being, a decent judge, they would have to. For example, there's a dispute in your family. There's a couple of members of your family that are fighting, and they brought the issue to you. Indecently, what you would do is you don't like one of your cousins, you like the other one, so you pass judgment against the one you don't like. But what does judgment or justice or decency require? That you look at the facts of the case. Okay. Now that you discover the truth, it's not enough that you found the truth, you have to now stand by that truth. You have to make a judgment, you have to take action in accordance with the truth that you found. It is possible that you find the truth, and when you find it, you don't like what you found. And when you don't like what you found, your actions don't represent your findings. So what you believe to be true isn't being reflected in your actions. What do we call that? Hypocrisy. That's nifaq, that's hypocrisy. But if you find something to be true, then it is part of human decency to stick to it, live by it, execute it, implement it, and that is the next necessary consequence. Now, that's one thing that you internalized it for yourself. That this is injustice and I'm not going to do it. I've discovered that this is a wrong act, I will not commit it. I will discover that this is what I must do and I will do it. Now when you see other people doing wrong, then the society in which we live, we have the MYOB policy, mind your own business policy, right? This is not the policy of the prophets. This is not the policy of the believers. In other words, if the prophets were to mind their own business, then salah and dhikr of Allah would be it. That would be it. You have Surah al-Muzammil. The messenger is being told, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, قُمِ اللَّيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا نِصْفَهُ أَوْ انْقُصْ مِنْهُ قَلِيلًا أَوْ زِدْ عَلَيْهِ وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. Recite the Quran. Remember Allah. That's for himself. But then there's another surah, right? There's Muzammil and what else? يَا أَيُّهَا الْمُدَّثِّرْ قُمْ فَأَنذِرْ وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. Go, rise and warn. Warn who? Others. Tell them what you're doing is wrong. Now if you find something to be wrong, and when you see a wrong happening, it is human decency to say that you should at least speak out against it. And say, you guys shouldn't do that. Now let me give you a real life scenario. You know that other people's property should not be damaged. Right? People have the right that their property should be respected. You're walking down the street, and a couple of kids are playing baseball in the street, and they're hitting the ball really hard, and it's hitting other people's cars. Right? Now you know the truth already. The truth is they shouldn't be doing that. You wouldn't do that yourself, so you've done a good thing for yourself. You're not a criminal. Fine. But is that enough? Is that enough that you just walk by and the thought comes to your mind, maybe I should tell these guys this isn't a good thing. Maybe I should tell them they don't have a right to do that to other people. Maybe I should stand up for justice. But when you want to stand up for justice like that, you know some other thoughts come in your mind that stop you from doing that. What comes in your mind? And these guys might get together and beat me up. I might become the baseball. Right? Instead of bashing the car, they might bash me up. So I better keep my mouth shut if I know what's good for me. I know it's wrong, I shouldn't do it, but I don't have the guts to tell them not to do it. You understand? I know it's right, I must do it, I don't have the guts to tell somebody else, I don't know if you should do that. At the very least to tell them. If you can't enforce it, at least to tell them. Now the thing is, a decent human being, a courageous human being, doesn't just stop themselves from doing wrong. What else do? They open their mouth about it. And you know what? Even kuffar do that. Even non-Muslims do that. Even mushrikun do that. Even when they believe for some of them believe, for example, that, animals have a right not to be eaten or whatever. They don't just become vegetarians. What else do? Animal rights protests. Right? They go out and they speak their mind. First they convince themselves of something, then they implement it on themselves, and then what do? They go out there and stand up for it. They'll even take a beating for it, might get sprayed in the face for it. And this is not even Muslims. But this process exists for those who commit to something. Where does it all come from? It all started from their belief. Their belief was really strong, and it was strong enough to change their behavior. It was strong enough to change their behavior, then it was strong enough to make them speak out about it. And it was when they spoke out about it and they got tough times for it, they were willing to persevere. They were willing to just stick it out. No matter what, we're going to do this thing. So you have this idea of, this progression that starts with conviction. It doesn't just happen with Islam, it happens with any ideology, by the way. Communists did this. Students in Tiananmen Square did this. The Irani society did this when they revolted against the Shah. They did they believed something, they changed themselves, then they stood up for it and they spoke out about it, and when persecution came, they were patient, perseverant. This is even among non-Muslim history, you find this is the revolution of Gandhi or whatever, right? Same idea. It is the same logical progression. But now we're taking this human, and by the way, every time this kind of struggle happens, from a non-Muslim, we're not even talking from an Islamic point of view. From a non-Muslim point of view, those people who do this, who follow this process, are called heroes in history. They call them heroes in history. Whoever followed this procedure. Whether it's Martin Luther King, whether it's God, whoever it may be, they are looked upon as people who accomplished great things because they stuck to their beliefs and they stood up for justice, no matter what the cost, right? And their days are celebrated and there are books written about them, monuments made about them. All of this is done because human beings deep down inside, no matter what culture, what tradition they come from, this is the process of decency that they respect. But then to imagine that you're fighting for something that in and of itself is incomplete. Most human beings, even great human beings that struggled, whose struggles are commendable, they ended up struggling for something that in and of itself may be true, but it's only a small part of the truth. It's not the whole truth. And what Allah gave to us is the entire truth. So if they are willing to be convinced of something that is a small part of the truth, can you imagine a comparison between any of those activists and a believer? How much more convinced the believer should be? And if they are willing to change themselves, how much more willing should a believer be to change himself? And if they are willing to speak out about it, how much more willing should a believer be? And if they are willing to stand up against oppression and still stick to their beliefs and stand up for them and speak the truth no matter what the cost, how much more of a right does Allah have on the believer? Sometimes the kuffar become, man, they can stand like that and compete in sabr. This is why Allah says to us at the end of Surah Ali Imran, He says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, isbiru, wa sabiru, wa rabitu, wattaqullah. Those of you who claim to believe, have perseverance, then compete in perseverance. Meaning your enemies also have sabr. They have beliefs, and they act out on those beliefs, and no matter how hard it gets, we must persevere. We must move forward. They have this idea. You should compete with them in sabr and remain consistent. وَرَابِطُوا وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ. And you have something they don't have. Your taqwa will give you strength. They don't have taqwa. They will not give them strength. You will be able to beat them in this competition of sabr and perseverance. SubhanAllah. So, this was the overview that I wanted to share with you before we got into the tafseer of the surah itself. Now we begin bi'idhnillah ta'ala. First we begin with the ayah wal-Asr. We already talked about the oath and its benefits, so we'll look at some of the opinions of the Salaf, including the Sahaba. We begin with Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He says it refers to the ages, meaning different ages of different nations, and the decades and centuries that have passed in human existence. In other words, when we said Allah is talking about all of human history as proof that human beings are in loss, even today, that's what Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu is saying in a nutshell. Ibn Kisan says Al-Asr refers to the night and the day. In other words, the human being should look at the nightfall and the daybreak and say, I am in loss. The state of emergency should be awakened every time the believer sees nightfall and every time he sees or she sees daybreak. SubhanAllah. So we know it's easy to say, they said this and you move on. But when they said that, what is the consequence of that? What happens to our understanding of Qur'an and the way we look at the night and the day and the way we think about time? These are transformational things. Sometimes you find the Salaf, their tafsir is one word, 2 words. The whole ayah, their tafsir is one word. But if you think about that word, man, you realize how deep these people are, subhanAllah. They say a lot by saying a little. It takes us a lot more to say a little, but they say a little, but they end up saying a lot in those few words. They have this eloquence to them. Then, similar, Hasan al-Basri says this is from late day to sunset. This is the span from late, meaning beginning of Asr all the way to sunset, which is what I told you in ancient times. This was the time when there's a lot of hustle and bustle and emergency. Also, it illustrates the end of an era, meaning a day is like an era, it's the end of an era. So what that implies as far as the human being is concerned is, know that your life is basically on the verge of death. Know that you are on the verge, on the very edge of the end of your life. Just like the sun is about to run out and darkness is about to fall, this life of your world, your worldly life is about to run out, and the death of it is about to fall upon you. Think of it like that, and then you will develop that state of emergency. Qatada says it's the last part of the day, radiallahu anhu. Maqatil and Zamakhshari both actually commented this is Salat al-Asr. Their interpretation of what Asr was, Salat al-Asr. And this is part of the methodology of tafsir that says that when Allah swears by something, it must be something sacred. Right? That's one of the opinions about oaths. So in line with that methodology, they are saying, because Salat al-Asr is sacred, and how is it sacred? Allah calls it, حَافِظُوا عَلَى صَلَوَاتِكُمْ وَالصَّلَاةِ الْوُسْطَى. Right? Guard your prayers, especially the middle prayer. And what's the middle prayer? Al-Asr. Right? Surah Al-Asr. So Allah especially makes a point to talk about the Asr prayer. And why the Asr prayer? Again, tied to what society was doing at that time. They're really, really busy at what time? Asr. That's when their meeting is. That's when the project is due. Then when the store is most busy. When the store is most busy, that's the hardest time to leave and make salah, isn't it? When the meeting is going on, between exactly the times of, that's the time for them. When they have to break away from their dunya activities and go and make the salah. So Allah swears by that, and the fact that they're not able to do that, they are in loss. SubhanAllah. Then in Adwa al-Bayan we find, actually, first we'll go to Aysar al-Tafasir, it says ad-dahru kulluhu. Al-Asr refers to time, all of it. And when we get to linguistic analysis, we'll see the difference between the word dahr and the word asr. In Surah Al-Insan, Allah says, أَتَى عَلَى الْإِنسَانِ حِينٌ مِنَ الدَّهْرِ. So the word dahr is used. Here the word asr is used. So we'll understand the difference between these two words. But anyway, Aysar al-Tafseer says, الدهر كله. Adwa al-Bayan says, الزمن كله أو جزء منه. It is all time or a portion of time. And because of that portion of time, some Mufassirun even said, al-Asr here is referring to the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And they interpreted this because in another place in the Quran, Allah swears by the age of the Prophet. La umruka. He swears by the lifespan of the Prophet ﷺ. So they inferred from that when Allah says, wal asr, it's referring to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. In other words, the life of the last messenger that is being sent to all humanity. If they don't listen to him, they are definitely in loss. You see the connection? Because this is the dawn of, or this is pretty much the sunset of the life of this world. This is the last messenger. This is one of the greatest signs of the end of this world, is the coming of the final messenger. And his life in and of itself is the biggest proof that human beings are headed for tremendous loss. So that's how they understood the word al-Asr also. Then we'll look at Az-Zujaj. He says, وَرَبِّ الْعَصْرِ. That, this is actually a specific brand of Mufassirun. They did this. Whenever Allah Azza wa Jalla swears by a creation, they assume that the word Rabb is mahdhuf. It's understood before it. So he is saying, I swear by the Master, the Lord of time. So when Allah says, wal fajr, these scholars will interpret it as, wa rabbil fajr. Right? Wal duha, wa rabbil duha. That's how they'll understand it. And they've done this consistently. A brand of scholars have done that consistently. But that's not the majority position. Nonetheless, I feel inclined to share it with you because this is within Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah and it did exist in our history. Anyhow, finally, Ibn Kathir rahimahullah says, الزمان الذي يقع فيه حركات بني آدم من خير وشر. This is all time in which the activities of the human being, of the children of Adam have occurred, whether they be good activities or they be bad activities. And by saying good and bad, what he's actually telling us is that the human beings overall, what have they done more of, good or bad? They've done more bad, hence they are in khusr. Time has illustrated that they had opportunity to do both, but they ended up doing more bad than good, so human beings have ended up in loss. Now we're going to look at a linguistic analysis of the word asr itself. The word asr comes from a verb. The fi'l form is asarahu or i'tasarahu. Both are used. Ifti'al and the thulathi mujarrad is also used. Literally means he pressed it, he squeezed it, he drenched it. It's used for cloth that is drenched in water, and then you squeeze it like that and all the water comes out. That's how it's used. Also it can be used for fruits. When you squeeze a fruit and you get juice out of it, Arabic word for juice is asir. And the verbal form is i'tasarahu. Or i'tasara al-burtuqal, for example. I'tasara al-tuffah. In other words, he drew juice out of the apple. He drew juice out of... So to squeeze something, this is the first meaning. Asara al-thawba also, that he wrung water out of the garment. Then in the Quran we find وَفِيهِ يَعْصِرُونَ. This is the mudari' form that's also used in the Quran. This is the interpretation of the dream by Yusuf alayhi salam. And in it, we find وَفِيهِ يَعْصِرُونَ. And they also, they will squeeze juice. You know how in the ancient times they used to press grapes, stomp on grapes to make wine, or olives and other things like that. That's the word being used for squishing them, to actually bring the wine out of them or the juices out of them. The poet says, لَوْ كَانَ فِي أَمْلَاكِنَا أَحَدٌ يَعْصِرُ فِينَا كَالَّذِي تَعْصِرُ. Had there only been among our leaders any one of them that spends or squeezes out from his wealth to give to us the way you give. In other words, this guy from one tribe, he goes to the leader of another tribe, and he's trying to get some money out of him, right? So, and he thinks of money as, you have so much, so what you give is just a little droplets that you squished out of there. You have the core of it. So he says, I wish we had leaders that, squish some of their wealth so we could enjoy the droplets the way you give. So he's trying to butter him up so he gives him some money, basically. That's what poetry is about. But the benefit of poetry is it gives us an insight on how the Arabs use these words. So we have a better understanding of how Allah Azza wa Jalla is communicating with those ancient Arabs. Because it's their language, that's the language they spoke. Then we find asarat, interesting usage of verbs in the Quran, in ancient Arabic. Asarat is used for a woman who has reached the dawn of her youth. In other words, her youth is about to expire. Then they say about her asarat, the feminine form is used for her. Or if a girl reaches maturity, they also use the word asarat, that she's matured into a woman. We find a'sarat as-sahaibu, the clouds reached a point where they were to be squeezed by the winds. Literally, the image, the Arab it's very picturesque language. The clouds are imagined as like cloth that are squeezed, and then the rain comes down. This is actually the imagery captured in the word in the Quran, وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ الْمُعْصِرَاتِ, same root. وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ الْمُعْصِرَاتِ مَاءً ثَجَّاجًا. Same root is used. We set down from the clouds that are squeezed, meaning winds push them against each other and they get squeezed and then the rain comes down. That's the imagery that's been presented in these ayat. That the Asr is, this is something we mentioned before, but I'll tell you where it comes from now. Ash-Shihab writes this in Sharh al-Shafi. He says, Asr is a period of time during which someone you know passes away. And is also a period of time that you know in history where a nation became extinct, or a nation came to its end, which is tied to what we were saying in the beginning. A state of emergency and also the tragedy of human history. That's the two themes that are connected in the meaning of Asr. Then finally, a couple more. مَا فَعَلْتُهُ عَصْرًا. When you say مَا فَعَلْتُهُ عَصْرًا, it means I didn't do it at the time I was supposed to do it. So Asr is used as a time you are supposed to do something. By understanding that implication of Asr, what we're learning in وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ is human beings are in loss, and the time to change the way they are supposed to do it is right now. This is the time to change immediately. That's one of the benefits of Asr in that word. Then جَاءُوا وَلَكِنْ لَمْ يَجِئَ لِعَصْرٍ. Similar meaning. He came but not at the time he was supposed to come. Or they came but not at the time that they were supposed to come. These are the meanings of just the word Asr. We are being asked to reflect on time that is dripping away from all of us. We can get lost in the technicalities and the grammatical analysis and the quotes of the Mufassirun, but let's think about how this applies to us. You and I have 24 hours in a day. How many of them are gone in sleep? How many of them are gone in work? How many of them are put into efforts to build our savings, dunya savings, pay the bills, but how much of it is being prepared so we can pay our bills in the akhirah? How much of it is going so that we can actually be ready to stand before Allah Azza wa Jal for that audit? There's the audit in tax season, then there's the ultimate audit that's coming, in which we all have to stand for every single thing that we've done. If I say this all the time, one of the benefits of this surah and using the word Asr, because it's part of a day, is Allah is making us imagine our entire life as though it is how many? One day. That it's one day. If you can transform how you spend one day, basically you have transformed your life. Because you know this already. Many of you work full time, or are students full time, or do you take care of the home full time? A lot of your days are exactly the same. There's a lot of routine. It's the same exact thing over and over and over again. So if you can bring a change to one part of your day, you've actually transformed one part of your entire life. You've transformed an entire part of your life. And that the time to make that change is running out. And my personal advice to you, this is not part of Tafseer, just personal advice, we make changes to ourselves in Ramadan. We make those changes. We make changes for Eid. We make changes, or break from our schedule on special occasions, at the death of a family member. We make changes on these kinds of special occasions, at the birth of a child, etc., etc. But then we go back to the routine. We go back to our old ways. Why do we go back to our old ways? Because we don't see the sense of urgency. You see, you don't say, man, I used to go to work on time at 9 o'clock, and I was doing that for a while, but then I just, got lazy, and now I go at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. You won't do that because you know you're going to get fired. There's a sense of urgency, you have to be there. And the fact that you have convinced yourself that there's an absolute sense of urgency, you have no choice but to be there on time every day, you have no choice in the matter, it automatically made your consistency easy for you. It didn't make it hard anymore. You just have to do it, you don't think twice about it. Somebody says to you, how do you do it, man? I just got to do it. I don't think about it, I just do it. That's it. Now if we really, really believed, like we believe we will lose our job when we don't show up on time, right? If we really, really believed that we are heading for loss, and there are certain behaviors that need to enter into our life, like the regularity of salah, for example, like the abandonment of vain activity, for example, if we were really convinced that not changing our behavior will lead us to loss, like the loss of a job, right? Like, nobody's going to be late for their immigration appointment. They're going to be there 2 hours early. Right? They're going to prepare the night. They have Qiyam al-Layl the night before because it's at 6 a.m. so they won't go to sleep. They'll be there early because they are convinced this has to do with, if they don't do this, they will be in loss. If we are truly convinced this will lead to loss, then changing one day, rather changing your whole life, becomes very easy. But when does it become easy? When there is belief. Which is why when Allah talked about khusr, what's the first exception He mentioned? Those who what? They believe. There's not just casually, those who believe, yeah, I'm included. No. There's not the kind of belief we're talking about here. This is real, deep conviction that what I am doing is directly connected to my success, directly connected to my failure. I better change my ways. I better get my act together. This is just in the word al-Asr itself. Just in the word, how it's being squeezed and drenched away, and I don't have time. The students, those of you that are students here, you have an assignment due, and you forgot to do it. There's time running out, right? The kind of urgency you will see in a student, the kind of urgency to study for the exam before the final, the kind of urgency you will see for an accountant in tax season, the kind of urgency you will see, for example, if you're late to work, the kind of behavior you will have at home, things will be upside down. You better not be late. You're going to turn the whole house up. Nothing matters at that time. You won't care about breakfast or this or that or the other. You will go because there's a sense of urgency. You are convinced you will be in trouble if you don't do it. You're absolutely convinced. We have to compare that conviction to our conviction in terms of our deen. And our if your boss says to you, I swear to you, you are in trouble. If your boss says that to you, he says, I swear, he comes into the office, he doesn't point at you. He says, every single employee is in trouble. I swear. Every single one. They're gonna lose big. When he walks away, do you think any of the employees say, not me, I'm okay? Nope. He didn't specify, right? He didn't say some people are in trouble. He didn't say that guy over there is in trouble. What did he say? Every single one. You're all in trouble. And you're gonna find out pretty soon, time's running out. There's a deadline. You're going to find out very, very soon how much trouble you're really in. Now when you hear that, in dunya, there's a sense of urgency. There's, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? What does he want? Why is he angry? Is it something we're not doing? Now think about this. When you get a job, and I'm giving you these examples so we understand the rest of the surah well, inshallah ta'ala. This is a critical surah for the life of a Muslim. It is such a gift from Allah that He gave us 3 ayat that could change our life. You don't have to memorize Quran to change your life. Just remember Surah al-Asr, man. Subhanallah. How it will transform your life. How it will transform your life. Now think about this. You get a job. Your boss says to you, you got 4 tasks. Every day, you have how many? 4 tasks. Sometimes your boss gives you tasks that you're really good at. And sometimes you have tasks that you don't like doing. But because this is your job, how many tasks do you have to do? All 4. You only like 2 of them, but you still have to do 4. 2 of them you enjoy doing, 2 of them you don't enjoy doing, but you still do 4. Now if some of you decide, or I decide, I'm just going to do 2 of those. Because I'm really good at those 2. I'm not going to even touch the other 2. I'm not worried about that. He'll be okay. When he sees how impressive my first 2 are, he'll forget about the other 2. So you don't do the other 2 tasks. And the boss comes after a week, so what's the story? Where are you on the progress? I finished the first 200%. Oh, what about the other? Actually, I'm not going to do those. But see how good I did the first 2. What's going to happen to this person? What do you think is going to happen? He's going to keep his job? No. Even if you did not the best job, but at least you did your best for all 4. You didn't get 100%. You got a 70% for all 4. That's better than you getting 100% for one of them. You understand? So when Allah sets out 4 conditions, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. And we say, Iman, yeah, we should work on our Iman. Some good deeds. And you say, this other stuff, this is for speakers. This is for da'i, this is for the shaykh, this is for somebody, this is not for me. This is for somebody else. Then what are you doing? You're saying, Allah says, everyone's in trouble except people who meet 4 conditions, but you're only interested in 2, or 1, or 3, or whatever. You're picking and choosing, that is also in loss. It's all or nothing. It's all or nothing. That's the attitude we have to develop in regards to this surah. I'll take 10 more minutes, inshallah ta'ala. We'll probably have to have a 3rd session about Surah al-Asr, inshallah. That was my fear originally, was 3 sessions on Surah al-Asr. Walillahi alhamd. Okay. Let's get to Inna al-insana lafi khusr. First of all, the word inna. Inna is used in the Arabic language, not just to mean certainly, but to talk to a group of people that are in doubt about what you are saying. By using the word inna in innal insana lafi khusr, we are already learning that most human beings, when they hear this, guess what? They don't believe it. They don't believe that it's that bad. It can't be that bad, bro. That's a pretty depressing lecture you gave. It can't be that bad. And Allah is making sure you understand, for sure this is the case. Inna. Rhetorically, it's used لِإِزَالَةِ الشَّكِّ. It is used to remove doubt. And by saying that, I say the doubt already exists. The doubt already exists. And you would think this is talking to al-kafir. Some mufassirun said, al-insan ay al-kafir. But then other mufassirun came with even stronger dalil against that. Why? Because al-istithna at the end, illa, with the exception. Because Allah put exception, it's all humanity. If it was al-kafir, then there wouldn't be an exception to the kafir. Kafir is kafir. But because it's illa at the end, this is referring to each and every single human being. Now let's look at the word insan quickly. The word insan, we've talked about this before because it's come up many times in different surahs. The word insan comes from different roots, it's argued. One of them is nisyan, forgetfulness. And part of that is the human being can be reminded that he's in really, really deep trouble, but what happens soon after? Forgets. You hear a khutbah, you get reminded, you remember, and you say, man, seriously, I got to get my act together. And then by the time you get to the car in the parking lot of the masjid, you've already forgotten. Insan. Human beings, Allah gave him a covenant before he even came to this earth. أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى شَهِدْنَا in Surah Al-A'raf. He said, am I not your master? We said, yes, of course you are. We bear witness. We bore witness to Allah that He's our master. When we came to this earth, guess what happened? We forgot. We forgot. We forget the seriousness of saying La ilaha illallah. We forget the power of saying Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. We forget. So the word insan, as opposed to al-fard, the individual, an-nafs, the person. There are different words that are alternatives. Al-bashar, the people, an-nas. But al-insan here, two benefits of it. One, to allude to our forgetfulness. And two, the word insan is individual, it's called ism lil jins. The benefit of knowing that is, this word includes two things. It includes all categories, meaning all human beings, and at the same time it's singular. And here we have to learn something. This is the last thing we'll share for today, inshallah ta'ala. Just a little bit about the word insan, is the concept of the diffusion of responsibility. This is a concept in psychology. It's called diffusion of responsibility. All of you are here. Let me give you a classroom example or a home example. My kids are at home. I have 5 kids, alhamdulillah. They're home, they're running around. As I'm leaving the house, I say to them, be good, and I close the door. I just say, be good. Are they going to be good? No. This is what you call diffusion of responsibility. But if I open the door and I say, Husna, don't bother your sister. Waliya, don't draw on the wall. Huda, don't yell. Ahmad, go to sleep. If I specify, then are they going to be more responsible? Yes. If I say generally, then what happens? It must be talking about someone else. I'm already good. You understand? The teacher says in the classroom, the kids are making lots of noise. The teacher says, be quiet everyone. Does it work? But the teacher takes one student and makes an example out of them. Everybody's making noise. This is, by the way, for teachers, this is a good tip. Okay, everybody's making noise. You single out one student. Kareem, you want to keep talking? Just one. Guess what's going to happen to everybody else? Everybody chills out. Why? You specify. There's no more diffusion of responsibility. It didn't get divided up. And a lot of times when people are given a responsibility, they start assuming, yeah, it's important, but there's always someone else who can do it. Right? Yeah, there's trouble. The teacher walks in, you guys are in big trouble. The teacher says, you guys are in big trouble. Not that scary. I pick on Kareem again. Kareem, you don't know how much trouble you're in. Is that far more scarier for Kareem? It is, isn't it? Now to say, إِنَّ النَّاسَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ, people are in trouble. People are in loss. That's one thing. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ, each and every single individual, forgetful human being is immersed in a state of loss. So when the human being hears this ayah, who is he to think about? Himself. Forget everybody else. Forget everybody else. It's just I am in trouble. I shouldn't think about anybody else right now. I should only be thinking about myself. When it comes to our salvation, being saved on the Day of Judgment, there is no charity. On that day, the mother doesn't care about the child. The mother doesn't care about the child. With the exception of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the people, the prophets alaihi wasallam are saying, we can't make shafa'a for you. Go someone else. I have nothing to give you. That is the day when brother is running from brother. Best friends are no longer best friends. وَتَقَطَّعَتْ بِهِمُ الْأَسْبَابِ يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ. On that day, you love your family so much. And by the way, we sometimes, out of love of people, we do really bad things. Right? We do really, really bad things. And those same people, the person who's about to be thrown in hellfire on the Day of Judgment, he says, وَمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا ثُمَّ يُنْجِيهِ. He says to Allah Azza wa Jal, لَوْ يَفْتَدِي مِنْ عَذَابِ يَوْمِئِذٍ بِبَنِيهِ وَصَاحِبَتِهِ وَأَخِيهِ. Can I be saved from the punishment in exchange for my son? Can you throw my son, my baby, can you throw him in hell instead of me? That's what the guy will say. And my wife, and my brother, and my mother, وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ وَفَصِيلَتِهِ, and his extended family. وَمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا. He will look at all humanity and say, oh Allah, you're about to throw me. Why don't you take all of them instead? All of them. Just let me be saved. ثُمَّ يُنْجِيهِ, then he should be saved. SubhanAllah. That is the state of affairs. Now think about that. This day, on that day, you'll forget everyone. So what we're learning here is, this is the time to forget everyone first. You should be concerned about them second. Who should you be concerned about first? Yourself. I say this with all sincerity and goodwill at heart to the parents of Muslim children. We are so worried about our children, we're not too worried about ourselves. My kids got to go to an Islamic school. We got to make sure that they're in a good environment. What about your good environment? Why are you watching that stuff? Why are you talking like that? Why are you cheating in business? Why aren't you getting up for salah? We remember those we love, and we forget who? Our own selves. SubhanAllah. Can you talk to this? Can you talk to that? You know, they'll come to the shaykh, the imam. Can you talk to my kids? They need some advice. You don't need advice? Really? Because I will think, if you messed up in raising your kid, the first person who needs advice is you. What happened all these years? Where have you been? Where's the parent been who's supposed to do his job? SubhanAllah. So innal insan, bringing responsibility to ourselves, the state of emergency, the fact that we are not safe from loss. We're not even discussing loss yet. That's later on in the ayah. We're just at innal insan. And I think it suffices to conclude here, inshaAllah ta'ala, as far as today's dars. And bi'idhnillah, next Tuesday we'll try and wrap up the dars on Surah al-Asr. But innal insana lafi khusr. No doubt, each and every single human being, as forgetful as they are deeply immersed in loss. And as they realize that, they should also realize that Allah has already sworn, time is running out. Time for them to change their behavior is running out. May Allah Azza wa Jal help us internalize the lessons from Surah al-Asr. May Allah Azza wa Jal embed these lessons onto our hearts, that we may constantly remember them. May Allah make us like the Sahaba, who whenever they met each other, they wouldn't part each other. لَمْ يَتَفَرَّقَا حَتَّى يَقْرَأَ. You know, they wouldn't leave each other's company until they would recite to each other, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ اللهم اجعلنا من الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر آمين يا رب العالمين. Inshallah ta'ala, I hope to see all of you next Tuesday. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.